You've been called a serial killer of games.
I mean, the odds are absolutely against me. Maybe there's like 1 out of 10 chance, maybe there's 1 out of 20 chance. And you have to be, I guess, a little bit crazy to kind of work on that side of a business. Most of the games companies, they're super like hierarchical. Just this moment of truth and realization. And then they had this idea that, like, what if you would build a completely different type of games company where you would actually turn the kind of this organizational pyramid, like, you know, you would flip it. Like, we were so lucky that our first game on Facebook was an absolute failure. Had it been a success, it might be, but Supercell as we know it today wouldn't even exist. If I would be in your shoes, the thing that I would not do is...
Ilkka Paananen is the co-founder and CEO of Supercell, the powerhouse behind Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, and Brawl Stars. Ilkka built a culture where only the best ideas survive, with most projects being cut early to make room for true breakthroughs. In this speedrun session, he unpacks Supercell's radical culture, how to build great teams, and why taking big risks and ultimately failing are essential to startups. One of the really interesting parts of Supercell, beyond the games, is the culture that has enabled the development of so many hit games over such a long period of time as the market has shifted. So I want to kick this off with a question to Ilkka. What has remained consistent with Supercell's culture over the past years?
Well, hey, first of all, thank you for having me. Really great to meet you all, and congrats to all of you guys. Doug just told me how incredibly hard it's to get into speedrun in the first place. So as an entrepreneur, like, one of the most exciting things is always when you get to work, you know, on something new and build something from scratch. So I'm excited for you guys for that. About our culture, like, I think, you know, maybe I should go back to, like, you know, why we founded the company in the first place, because, you know, that belief still, like, is why we it's very much true. So basically, like, you know, when we founded the company almost 15 years ago, like, there was a group of 6 co-founders. I was lucky to be one of them, and you know, at that point in time, we already had been in the games industry for like roughly 10 years, like, each of us. So Supercell wasn't our first games company. And we sort of, like, at that time especially, like, most of the games companies were super, like, hierarchical, meaning that essentially, like, the CEO or the leadership team, like, ultimately decided what type of games the company would build. And you know, our previous companies, including the one that I helped to found and run, like, was exactly the same. But then, and it took me many years to realize, like, what's the fundamental problem in that model, and it's basically based on this assumption that somehow the CEO or the leadership team, you know, has taken a crystal ball and really knows what the players and the consumers want. And then I had this moment of realization, like, at some point in the previous company, where I realized that actually, like, you know, despite everything, all the great processes that I had put in place, we actually were able to put out some great games, but all of those great games, like, came somehow, like, outside that official process. And I realized that wow, like, the company is actually successful, like, not because of what I do, but despite everything that I put in place. And it was this moment of truth and realization. And then they had this idea that, like, what if you would build a completely different type of games company where you would actually turn the kind of this organizational pyramid, like, you know, you would flip it. So instead of a CEO and the leadership team owning the kind of vision, like, what type of games the company would do, like, what if it would actually be the game teams themselves and each of them would own kind of the vision of the game, and they could essentially be in complete control of, like, what type of game they would build. And then that sort of led to this idea that, hey, we should actually think about these individual game teams as, like, very independent teams. And then somebody had an idea that let's call them cells, and that's where the name of Supercell comes from. But really, like, this is the kind of core of Supercell still today. So we have this, like, fundamental belief that, you know, the team that works on any game, whether it's a new game or a live game, it doesn't matter, that team, like 100%, like, owns and controls, like, what they do, and there can't be any kind of external forces, and you know, including myself, that who can, like, go in and somehow mess with what the team is doing. So that certainly is still true. And then there are other things, like, for example, like, we've always had these, like, very ambitious goals and dreams for our games. So we like to say that we always kind of shoot for the moon, well realizing that most of the time, you know, we will fail by doing that. But that's a at the very core of Supercell. We want to take big risks, and again knowing that most of the time we will fail. So that's the other thing that I still is very much true.
And you've written about the fact that despite having such a strong culture, one of your early failures was not writing it down soon enough. So, but before you answer the question, can we just see a show of hands? Who has actually written down their culture and their values? So, what advice would you give to founders who have, obviously everyone has a founding vision and they have a sense of their culture. Why is it important, given everything that's going on in a startup, to write it down early?
So one of the biggest mistakes, obviously I made a huge amount of mistakes, but the one really big mistake early on was exactly that. So it talks so much about culture, but we never kind of I was too busy with other stuff. I'm sure many of you guys are as well, and we kind of never wrote them down. It took us, I think, 2 years to get to that point, and how we actually got to that point, that we realized that then, for example, when we talked about responsibility was one of our values, and then in this one meeting we started to talk about the responsibilities, and then it turned out that people had completely different ideas what that even means at Supercell, and then that sort of was the trigger that made us write them down. But the reason, and I'm not talking about you need to have this 10-page or 100 pages document, but try to steal them down to one. Just a one sheet, or even very simple, less than 10 slides. But the value of writing stuff down is that it kind of forces you to formulate and describe very clearly what those values are, and it also forces alignment and creates discussion.
And one of the ideas you talk a lot about is the best teams make the best games, which is how you figure out how to pair people together initially when they're starting a team to form a cell. How in the early days did you find the best talent or the best people to make up the best teams pre-traction when you did not have the success yet?
Basically, as I said, we were 6 co-founders. We had already been in games for roughly 10 years each, so we actually knew a lot of people. And basically, I remember we had these meetings where we were asking ourselves, okay, who are the very best people we've ever worked with? And that was basically how when they that helped us to get maybe the first 20 or 30 people on board. But by the way, that approach has also one disadvantage that I didn't realize at the time, because if you only recruit for your own networks and sort of the people that you like and all that, then you can run the risk of everybody is a little bit the same. So I think there's actually, and only later on we realized what's the value of diversity, and it has a massive value, and it took us years to understand it, because it's easily that you build this echo chamber when you just hire like-minded people. So I would advise also sometimes go out from your own circles and get people who are just different.
And you write a yearly blog post that kind of talks about what happened over the past year and going forward, your vision outlook for the next year for Supercell. And it usually happens around Q1, around this time. I'm curious if you have any topics that you could give us a sneak peek on that you're thinking about.
Well, maybe a few things. So obviously, last year was incredibly good for us. One of the best years we've ever had. For example, all of our live games grew, which I think was the first time in the history of the company, which is a unbelievable achievement from our live game teams. And obviously, one of the reasons why that happened is that we actually we got over our fears of growing these teams. So we had in previous years we just had under invested into our games, live games and the teams and the players and that type of thing. And by the way, the reason why we didn't do that, we were so scared of these bigger teams, because we were scared that they would bring in middle management and processes and bureaucracy and all that. But then once we finally got over those fears and started to grow the company maybe 2 years ago, now we can just simply do more for our players and for the games, and that really started to show actually in the results also last year. So I'm gonna reflect a little bit on that, and of course the shining star is Brawl Stars. I've never seen in my career the type of growth for a 6-year-old game, and it's been absolutely incredible. And of course we've been super lucky. I mean, luck has played a big role, but also the team has made some really great and bold changes to the game. So I'm gonna probably write something about that. And then on the other hand, the other big sort of thing that happened for us last year was that we launched Squad Busters, like game number 6, and we hadn't launched actually a game in a very long time. And had a fantastic start, but then also like there are clearly like quite a few issues also with the game that we are like really working hard to solve. So I'm gonna like also talk about that side of the business, and maybe just about the fact that how incredibly hard it actually is to launch new games, and that obviously is true for everybody. And I just actually read this statistics like when I was like writing the blog. Like the thing is that most of it, the kind of the time spent on games is actually spent on games that are actually relatively old. I think more than 6 years old. If I recall correctly, roughly like 60% of the time goes to games that are like more than 5 years old or more than 6 years old. So that tells you like how incredibly hard or difficult it is to actually introduce something new.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. I want to build on though your point about needing to grow the teams for the games that are actually live operating versus new game teams. And I understand you've kind of come to the conclusion that team makeup needs to be quite different for games that are live versus new game teams. And can you talk a little bit about what skills are required for each of those categories, how you think about that, and like how does the actual team composition change as well?
On the new game side, I think the way we think about it these days is actually that we use this phrase like, okay, let's think about new games as their own startups. In startups, what you need is basically the best possible team of entrepreneurs. The way I think about the best kind of founders and entrepreneurs I know, like for example, one thing that sort of is common for all of them is that they can somehow magically, like do like a lot of things with very little resources. They can just somehow like magically things just happen, even though it should be like impossible because they just don't have any resources. So we look for those type of people. Obviously, you have to have a very high level of ambition, and you have to be somehow you need to get energized about this fact that okay, like what I'm about to build here. It has the odds of kind of success are it's super low. I mean, the odds are absolutely against me. Maybe there's like 1 out of 10 chance. Maybe there's 1 out of 20 chance. But then you have this confidence and you get energized about it. And for example, in the room like this, like you would like feel sorry for everybody else who are going to fail because I'm going to succeed. So you have to almost like live in your own bubble that yeah, of course we're gonna succeed, even though that the facts like say that you won't. So and you have to be, I guess, a little bit crazy to kind of work on that side of the business. And then the live game side, I mean, obviously still like you have to, like the same thing applies in terms of ambitions, but you also like have to be like a super sort of customer or player centric. You have to like really like understand the audience, and in the new game side, there's very little like data points that you can have, like despite how much focus groups and stuff you do, but you have to have a very strong intuition, like what you're trying to build. On the live game side, I think there's the data and these insights play a much bigger role, and you have to be the type of a person who actually like takes all of those inputs in, and then of course you still have a gut feel, and then you make decisions. But you have to be like I think more driven by the kind of the audience and understand the audience, etc. And then to continue on the live game side, obviously they are much bigger teams, so somewhere in the teams you have to have these like people who are great at operations. They must be organized. Of course, the variety of skills that the live game teams need, it's way different. So it's not just game development, the typical crafts like coding and art and design. It's also like stuff like analytics, monetization, live operations, and those type of things.
So extending the startup analogy, live games are almost like startups with product market fit, essentially.
Yeah, scale-ups, essentially, yes.
Mm-hmm. When you were early on in development, you were actually in the web game space, and there was a critical moment where you decided to pivot to tablets and then eventually mobile. Can you tell us that story, and what signals did you see that really gave you the confidence to make the switch in your development?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously was a great decision at the time, but I would say that again, I oftentimes talk about like the role of luck, and this is kind of a perfect example. Like we were so lucky that our first game on Facebook was an absolute failure. Because I mean, if you think about it, had it been a success, it might be that Supercell, as we know it today, wouldn't even exist. But that failure like forced us to get back to the drawing board and really like think like, okay, like clearly this isn't working. Like what and what should we be doing differently? And then somehow like some people had gotten their first iPads, which was a relatively new device at the time, and I was one of them, and we just fell in love with the device but realized that actually not that many great games, especially not great kind of social games, are available for the device, and most of these games are basically just ports from like a desktop, and we wanted to like create experiences that they were like truly social. And in heyday, we had like this trading mechanic, and later on like people could play together in neighborhoods, etc., etc. So that's sort of how we kind of thought about it. But again, like obviously we got super lucky with the timing. Like it was exactly the right time to start to do that. And back in that day, like this is like 2011, we actually had to like convince people that that free-to-play games are even real games. I remember like I was visiting GDC and showing the first version of Clash of Clans, and people would literally play that game and ask me that, I don't understand, like, why would anybody play this game? It's not even a game. And that's how like different, free-to-play felt to kind of the traditional sort of a game development industry at the time. But somehow, but then we can show that game like people who came from outside the industry, so we're real players. And there was a lot of excitement about the game, so then that kind of gave us conviction to continue.
You've been called, not you specifically, but Supercell has been called a serial killer of games. And that's because only a very small percentage of the games that are developed are killed, and some of them very publicly. Can you talk to the team here about how you think about product quality? What are the gates that basically you think about when getting a game ready to launch, and how has that changed over time as the market shifted?
Yeah, this is a great question. Actually, something that is very topical for us right now, because it used to be, I shouldn't say easy, but it was at least more straightforward. So we had these very simple rules, like stuff like, okay, that the day 30 retention must be above 20% at scale. And those type, and we always have been big believers, and actually still are, that the most important thing that you want to find is and what you need to focus on early on is like basically all of these retention and engagement metrics, because if those metrics are strong, I mean, then you have something that people truly like care about and they love, and then the monetization actually isn't as important, because as time goes by, you'll figure out some ways to kind of monetize also that use it. But the problem is that at least and what we learned from Squad is that it's at least in our scale, it's extremely difficult to kind of forecast like what might be, or extrapolate like from the sample sizes that you have, like okay, like how like how will these metrics look like at scale. To give you guys an idea, like at Squadbusters, we latest sort of a kind of closed test that they had more than 100,000 players in it, and we felt that they had a really good handle on the metrics. But then all of a sudden, when you get to like tens and tens and tens of millions of players, then those metrics actually change and the audience changes and all that.
And so, given all the learnings that you have and how difficult it is to launch a new game or even a new app or new product in today's market, what advice would you give to the teams here as they are building their product and getting their first customer, their 100th customer, their 1,000th customer, and eventually product market fit? Do you have any kind of tips and tricks or thoughts on what they should consider?
If I would be in your shoes, the thing that I would not do is that don't go to the top grossing chart and pick a game from there and say, okay, we're going to build a better version of this. Because I think that's going to be extremely difficult. So, as I said, when we kind of start to build Supercell, we were in this lucky place that, I mean, Mark's Farmville is a great example. So it didn't exist on mobile, but obviously, it had proven that these farm-themed games can be super successful because a massive hit on Facebook, and for a good reason. It was a great game. But then that sort of gave us an inspiration. But hey, if it's such a big sort of a genre on Facebook, like why wouldn't it be on mobile? But we came from a we had this advantage that we farming games at the time on say iPad and mobile, they're actually like not that great games. So when you can bring something that's like 100 times better, like then you will start to get traction. But today it's much harder to do it, and I think sometimes these games, like say take Monopoly Go or Candy Crush Saga or any of these games, they like from surface, like some people might think that these are actually relatively simple games and anybody could build this, but that's not true at all. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to build like quality experiences like them. So maybe that's the one thing. So what I would do is that try to build something that introduces something new to the players. And I think you just have to take a lot of risk. I mean, some people have this illusion that hey, let's kind of play it safe. Let's take this proven concept and then we're going to add this thing to this game. And very rarely. I mean, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but very rarely it actually works. Mm-hmm. So go crazy, build something that doesn't exist, would be my advice.
And everyone in this room, all the founders, are working on their pitches. We have demo day coming up, and you led the all of the investment rounds for the pitches for Supercell in the early days and beyond. You're an investor yourself, and also Supercell invests in companies. What advice do you have for everyone here as they're thinking about building their pitch? What should they do? What shouldn't they do?
The way I would approach is that first of all, like talk about your ambition, talk about the dream, and one of the best advices that I got like back in the day is that when you're kind of forming your vision for the company, like create the boldest, the biggest vision you can, and once you've done it, like then 10x it, and then and keep on like growing and the vision like until it feels that it's going to be impossible to reach this. But that and in Supercell's case, our kind of vision was that we wanted to create these games that are remembered forever. So we talked about companies like say Nintendo, like we talked about brands like Zelda and Mario, and we wanted to be in that class of companies. And it's very clear that even today we have like a long way to go if you ever want to get there. But that's kind of our North Star. But have a kind of very ambitious vision that hopefully like somehow stands out. And the reason why our vision at the time stood out was that because casual games were known for this like kind of one-hit wonders or kind of lots of people call them like snack entertainment because back in 2010 like a game would shoot up the App Store charts and then month later, nobody would even remember that game anymore. So they had a very like short lifespans, and we wanted to like change, and we wanted to truly create these games that people play for years and years and years. So that was our vision at the time. So like, and in today's world, obviously it probably has to be something different because what I just said isn't different anymore because everybody is doing that, or at least trying to do that. So big vision, very high level ambition. And make it very, very clear. And then just, talk about the team, like what makes your team great. Because I mean, I think plans at the stage that you guys are at, they have very little value. Of course, you have to have a plan, but every like good investor will know that the plan will change like in 2 weeks' time as you learn more. So the plan actually as such has very little value. But what has value is and the plan doesn't really matter if you have the right people, the right team. So if there's any kind of proof points that you can actually prove to the investor that, hey, this actually is a really, really great team. And if there's any kind of like a track record or something that can prove that that's the case, those 2 things are most important. So, very bold vision and then, just prove that this is a fantastic team.
Is there anything that everyone here should definitely not do? Anything you've seen in pitches that you haven't liked?
Well, it's just me. So and maybe you guys think differently, but I don't like pitches that like talk about like exit strategy. So I just can't get excited about companies which like when you're kind of founding the company, you're already thinking like, okay, this is how I'm going to sell it to someone. And sometimes I see pitches where even like name companies, so here are the 5 potential buyers, and I just don't get excited about it at all. But maybe it's just me, because I think what this world needs is new, great, like independent companies, not, just companies to be sold. And I also I would worry that if I get the sense that ultimately like what drives the founder is just this idea of like making money, I think it's absolutely the wrong reason to found a company, because first of all, the likelihood that you will make money is actually relatively low. It probably doesn't happen. I mean, odds are against you, and if you don't, I think, you know, the passion has to come from the fact that, okay, I want to build something great, and I want to build something great for my users, my customers, my players. So that's, you know, how I think about it.
So zooming out and thinking about the future, you know, going back to the finding the waves out there analogy, what trends are you seeing in the market, whether it's mobile games, mobile apps, broader technology that you think are interesting? And, you know, where could someone in this room potentially find a new wave?
I mean, we all carry the sort of a connected gaming device in our pockets, like the smartphone. Like, I feel that there must be still a lot more innovation that can happen on the social side of, like, you know, game design. Like, what are the different ways that people can, you know, actually interact and play these games together? And I think there must be, like, new innovations, like, coming from that space. So that's one. The other is obviously obvious one, like AI, of course. Like, you know, like how can AI help, like, smaller teams do bigger things? You know, like, because it's just more efficient to build and you know, and all that. But also, like, what type of new gameplay might AI enable? So that's, I think, is interesting. But and then maybe, like, this idea that, like, what even is a game, like, these days? So, like, you know, like, I think it's becoming quite sort of almost like blurry, like, and you know, like, if you like, maybe if you take, like, how people use, like, say, for example, TikTok and different type of services, and then, like, are there, like, ways, and then you can take games and you take, like, you know, some great IP, maybe AI that enables, like, you know, this, like, endless content creation, like, what is in the somewhere in there in the middle. Mm-hmm. But just some, like, general thoughts.
Yeah, let's dig into generative AI for a minute. You know, something that struck me is just the fact that AI is enabling smaller teams to do much more. Actually feels a lot like, you know, Supercell's early days, where the idea was keep the team small, continue to iterate on the games, and you know, move quickly, launch. What do you think that, you know, AI will, you know, how will it impact Supercell, but also kind of the broader tech ecosystem, and you know, how will competitors emerge potentially for Supercell as well?
How we think about AI is actually, like, largely speaking, in those two buckets which I just spoke about. So, like, I mean, obviously, like, AI in theory, like, I mean, should be a good friend for Supercell, because we have always been about these small teams, and yes, now these teams are slightly bigger on the live game side, but, you know, we are nowhere near the kind of the size of the teams that many of our, like, I guess, bigger competitors have. So our biggest live game teams are, I guess, like, between 60 to maybe 60 to maybe all in, like, 100 people maximum. And whereas in the competition, I hear about these teams that our size are like 500, 600, 700. So we are not there. So, and on the new game side, we still very much believe in these small teams. So AI clearly can help, as you said, these small teams to do more in all kinds of different areas. So that's gonna be good. But then I think the even more exciting thing is that, again, it's like, what type of new gameplay might AI enable? And we have, like, all kinds of interesting, like, you know, prototypes going on, you know, as we speak, as I'm sure everybody has. And I haven't found anything like you know, fantastic yet. But I mean, somebody's gonna invent it. And I actually believe that if today you're founding a games company, like, one, you know, great thesis, and it's obvious, but, you know, like, what does a AI first games company look like today? And obviously, like, you know, companies like Supercell and others, like, we, you know, obviously we don't want to be disrupted about those companies, and that's why we also try to almost like disrupt ourselves by sort of you know, just trying to, like, innovate and do new things.
Let's thank Ilkka so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Games start to grow, and then they realized, like, relatively quickly, like, literally in, like, 2 months, that these metrics are starting to decline, and at some point, you know, I think it was like maybe end of August, early September, we realized, okay, this game is not gonna go anywhere. And imagine a board meeting where you have to go to the investor who literally has just put in the money, like, 3 months ago, and you know, believing in a product, telling that, hey, I have two pieces of news for you. Like, first of all, the game that you invested in, it's not going anywhere. We have to kill that game. But it's not only about the game. We've come to the conclusion that Facebook as a platform is absolutely the wrong platform for us. So what we will do is that we can, push the reset button. We're gonna throw everything down the toilet. But hey, we have this great new idea that we're gonna pivot the company to tablets and later on mobile.